Good morning, Vine Church. Can you guys stand with us as we begin worship this morning? felt no worth, you paid it all for me. Yes, you did. You have been so kind to me. Oh, love still loves Father. You have been so good to me. Sing of the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, rising from my knees, and I'd be done. I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Yeah. No shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. No wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. Sing, there's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. Pursue me. No wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, keep coming after me. No shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. No shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. And I'm grateful for you. No wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves and I'm denied. I couldn't earn it, and I don't deserve it, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God.
Would you be seated? Hope everybody's doing well. Just as we're getting rolling this morning, help me out here, would you? It's a little hot. Okay, as we're getting rolling this morning, I just want to let's take a moment of prayer. Father, we thank you for all that you're doing in the lives of those that are gathered here this morning at the Vine, and we pray that in these next few moments, as we open your word and think about your way, that we would hear your spirit speak to our hearts, and that in that whisper we would be changed, and that we would be molded more like you and more like your character, more like the way we were intended to live. We ask it in your name. Amen. Everybody's doing well? Okay, you guys look excited. All right, here we go. Couple of things. You've got to make some decisions. Some of you got to make some decisions quicker than others. You got to make some decisions how you want to end things. I don't know if you know that, right? There's basically two options when it comes to burial in our side of the world, our little section of the world. You can either go with casket burial, or you can go with cremation. There's your numbers. Right now in the United States, about 37% of people are buried casket burial. About 43% are are buried with cremation. That seems like something's lacking in there. I'm not sure what the other people are doing. But you've got to make some decisions. Those are your two basic options, and it's coming fast. I don't know if you know that. It's coming quick, so you need to decide on that. Here's your cost breakdown for some of these things. You can expect that the casket burial is about double your expenses, so if you really want to splurge, that's the way to go. That's the way to go. If you want to go on the cheap, definitely cremation is your option. But it's not the only option. And for those that want other options, let me just give you just a couple of thoughts really quick. There's a new thing just started here in Florida. There's a funeral home in St. Pete that's doing this. This is flameless cremation. This is a whole deal where they put you in, it's called alkaline hydrosis. So you get shoved in that tube after you go, and then they pretty much boil you down into a soup. They say this is the greener chemical process that reduces the body components to a liquid and bone. This is a greener way to go. No fumes coming off of you to affect the ozone layer. If you want one more option, check this out. They can take your cremated remains and make you into a diamond. Like they can make you into a diamond. It doesn't even take that much, maybe 8 ounces of your cremated remains that compress that down into a real diamond, and then you could leave it for your spouse to wear around and remember you by when they move on into their new life with their new mate. Okay, or you could take your cremated remains and they could press you into an album that your family can listen to. I don't know, like maybe your favorite tunes, maybe your favorite songs. Who still has a record player? I don't know, but they can make. This is the wrong service to ask that. Like hands just went up. Everybody's like, I still got one. What are you talking about? And an 8-track player. All right, this is the oddest one that I saw this week when I was looking at this. They can make your cremated remains into pencils. You can be made into pencils, roughly 240 pencils that come in this very nice container. You can only remove one pencil at a time. When you go to sharpen the pencil, you sharpen it on the container. That way the shavings remain in the container, which becomes an urn after all the pencils have been used. 240 pencils seems like you go a long way. I mean, that's like definitely a lifetime for me of pencil use. I don't know, but if you're going to write letters or whatever you're going to do with the pencils, take tests, I don't know what you do with pencils anymore, but that's a potential possibility, right? All of these things you can do with your created remains. We're in a series this morning here at the Vine talking about the woes. And that's found in Matthew chapter 23, if you'd like to follow along. And we are into our 6th woe. And woe here doesn't mean like, woe is me. Woe here is, hey, woe, you've crossed a line. Woe to you. And I'm going to be reading from Matthew chapter 23, starting in verse 27. I'm going to read through 28. Check this out. It says, woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You are like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of bones and the dead and everything unclean. In the same way, on the outside you appear to people as righteous, but on the inside you are full of hypocrisy and wickedness. Boom. Okay, it's a little heavy, a little harsh. This is angry Jesus. In these passages, this is not happy Jesus. This is angry Jesus. Look at this one more time and just check out some of this language here that goes into this. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees and hypocrites. And we've talked about this. This is that term in Greek for an actor. You're acting. Your public displays of religion are just a facade. You are like whitewashed tombs, and we're going to spend a little time on that today, which looks beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of bones of the dead and everything unclean. One more, look at this. In the same way, on the outside you appear to people as righteous. Let's look at this phrase and just spend a few moments this morning because there's some context to this. There's a historical setting to this. I want you to kind of put yourself into the actual words of Jesus as he speaks them to the people of his day. And I want to get a little bit of the cultural setting so you have a way to kind of conceptualize this. You're like whitewashed tombs. Not necessarily something that we think about too much, but check it out. We don't think about death at all, really. I don't know if you noticed that. Nobody really talks about this. In fact, you guys look fairly uncomfortable in the first couple minutes of the sermon. We don't talk about it a whole lot. There's just not a big explanation about death. And so we're going to get into it today. Here we go. So this is the boundary of what's typically called the city of David. So when you look at any maps today, any pictures of Jerusalem, you're looking at a widespread city that is spilled out of the original city walls, which is the original city of David. So the city that you see today as Jerusalem is really this sprawling kind of bubbled out into the burbs, so to speak, of the original city of David. And this original city that was called Jerusalem that you read about in the scripture is set on a ridge. And sometimes it's called a city on a hill, right? Jesus refers to it that way in the Sermon on the Mount. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. It's made mostly of white limestone. And can you go back to that picture one more time, Mike? Check this out. On both sides, this is called the Central Valley, and this is called the Kidron Valley. This sits on this ridge. And you'll notice that this was the actual barriers, the surrounding city walls of the ancient city of David. And up top at the highest point here is the temple. The dome on the rock sits on that temple today. Are you with me? Everybody got this? All right, so check this out. This is looking up. So you're in the Kidron Valley looking up towards the Temple Mount, the eastern wall, looking up at that temple. Now, when Jesus is doing a tremendous amount of this teaching, he's in this city with people who are familiar with this particular, like the geography and the look and the feel of this city. A lot of times he's teaching in the temple courts when he's teaching these messages. Next slide, look at this. Here's a kind of a model of the city that we're talking about, and you got the Temple Mount way up here, and then this Kidron Valley that runs along the exterior wall of the old city of David. Everybody's got this now. You're conceptualizing. Check this out. This is that valley. This is the Kidron Valley. And in that valley, and this is just one area, I'm just using this as an example of what we're talking about today. In this valley are all of these tombs. So when Jesus is in the Temple Mount and he's teaching and saying these words, it would be very simple to go, you're like whitewashed tombs. We're not talking about a long distance. It's within eyesight. It's something that they had to pass every day as they went up to the Temple Mount. And so you're like whitewashed tombs. And in this valley are all of these tombs. Some of these tombs still exist. You can go see them today on a Holy Land tour. Go back one more, Mike. No, that's good. Never mind. So this particular tomb right here is the tomb of Zechariah. This tomb over here is the tomb of Ben-Hazir, and you can go see those today. Check this out. This one here is the tomb of Absalom, usually attributed to the son of David. Many scholars believe that it came much later, but it was definitely there at the time of Jesus. So this is something Jesus would pass every day on his way to the temple. The disciples would have seen. This would have been something very familiar to them. And so when Jesus says these words, this is what they think of when they hear those words. You're like whitewashed tombs. And they're like, yeah, we get that. We pass them on the way to church every day. Are you with me? One more. Check this out. This is that same valley, this is that same tomb, and this is the same eastern wall headed up towards the temple. Are you with me? Okay. There's all of these graves. If you take it into that valley now, and some of these graves weren't there, they're more modern, but you can get a concept of the idea that looking from that valley upwards, you have all of these burial sites. Because as people died in this culture, there wasn't a lot of options to how your remains were taken care of. And so in this particular culture, at this particular time, things were done a very specific way, right? And in that culture, you were put into a tomb, the body went into decay, and then you were removed from that tomb later and had what was called a second burial, which we'll get to in a minute. You had a second burial, and they put you in an ossuary. We'll look at that in just a second. So check this out. You're like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of bones and dead and everything that's in decay and unclean. He's saying, there's some beauty to these tombs. And these tombs that surround the temple here that are filled up this valley and the grave sites, there's a beauty to that. There's a reason people from all over our country travel into Virginia and see Arlington and look at these grave sites. And there's a beauty to this that's hard to put into words as people the exchanging of the tomb of the unknown soldier, and people spend their, save up and spend their savings to go see all of these national monuments that are really tombs or grave sites there in our nation's capital. So check this out. Once you go into the tomb, usually the body takes about a year to 2 years to decay, and then they go back into that tomb, remove the bones, put those bones in an ossuary, which is really a limestone small box. Most of those ossuary boxes have engravings on the outside. Many of those boxes have names written in Arabic or Hebrew on the outside of those boxes. You'll check this out. Next slide. So you look at these. This is on the higher end. Think about it. Most of the people in this culture, if you had any means, any wealth whatsoever, you were placed into a tomb, which cost money. You were put into an ossuary, which cost money. You were then buried in a special site, which cost money. And so if you were poor, you probably, there was less of kind of the pomp and circumstance that went to this, and you went into a typical grave site with a marker. But in this particular culture, if you were wealthy, this was the typical process. And inside today, they find hundreds of these ossuaries all over all over the Jerusalem site. I mean, thousands and thousands of ossuaries that are still full of bones. This is just how they did it. Let's go back. Check this out. In Numbers chapter 19, which is the Old Testament, the Torah, which was the law they were working on at the time. And so when Jesus says these words to the Jewish leaders, they are people who live by the law, who refer to the law for everything they do in their life. And he makes this reference when he's talking about whitewashed tombs, because he's talking about the law and their conception of the law in Numbers chapter 19. Listen to what it says. Anyone out in the open who touches someone who has been killed with a sword, or someone who has died a natural death, or anyone who touches a human bone or a grave will be unclean for 7 days. That's the law. Now, what it doesn't say is anyone who touches a grave site or touches an ossuary or touches a tomb will be sinful. It's just they'll be unclean. Part of the Old Testament law was creating certain boundaries that helped remind the people of the concept of the holiness of God. And so kind of bound in or baked into this law is the idea that death was never what was intended or what was meant to be. And to touch death in any way was to separate, to be distant from the creator of life. And there was an uncleanness that happened there religiously. And so when a person touched a grave, they became unclean, and they could not go into the temple. They could not go to worship. They could not be with the other people who were worshiping at the temple. They could not make sacrifice for 7 days. And you say, okay, well, what's the problem with that? Let me give you a scenario, a story, if you will. So take, for example, Passover. In the Jewish Old Testament law and the Jewish Old Testament culture, there was basically 3 major traveling holidays that took place within a typical yearly Jewish calendar. One of them, maybe the most important one, was Passover, which was a day set aside to reflect on what God had done to rescue them out of Egyptian slavery. They continued to have this festival every year. As part of that festival, people from all over the Jewish world, as far south as Egypt and as far north probably as Turkey or Ephesus, traveled by foot in a hike into the city of Jerusalem for this festival. They came from all over. It was a giant family cultural event. For most of us, we hear this, we're like, that sounds awful, right? We're like, I got to hike for this. Doesn't sound good. But they loved it, right? It was this concept of like every year, we're going on this pilgrimage. We go into the city. We're going to basically tent camp for most of us. We're going to tent camp around the city. We're going to be there for a full week. We're going to be celebrating and eating together. There's festivities. There's music. There's family. There's out-of-town family we haven't seen in a year. All of that happening. but you got to travel to get there. And what we've learned from the Jewish writings and the historical writings is they instituted holidays that preceded Passover for the specific purpose of marking graves. Because think about this. If you're traveling in for Passover, you've spent all this money to get there and save money and come up with a sacrifice and travel to get there. And on the way, you step on or get next to or in touch with a grave. It's a travel for nothing. You get there and then you're like, well, I can't go to the temple. I'm just stuck. I mean, think about it. You're traveling, all of a sudden, like you end up on a grave. Your buddy's like, sorry, stinks to be you. This is a long walk for you to not participate because you're ritually unclean. And so when Jesus is saying these words, think about what he's actually saying. When he says, you're like whitewashed tombs. The whitewashing of tombs was a practice that was very common. They used a lime solution to whitewash all of these graves and tombs to mark them for people who were traveling into the city so they couldn't come in contact with these graves. They're beautiful in one aspect, but they're really a warning in another aspect. They're a warning that says, this is unclean. Don't touch this, because this would make you ritually unclean. You will not get to participate. You will be, for all intensive purposes, cut off from the community for this festival if you touch this. Right? So it's beautiful in one aspect, it's a show in one, but it's really a warning that there's something dead here. Are you with me? That's what's going on. And so when Jesus says this, that's the cultural setting that's being said here. So if you said, how would you make this like something modern, right? I'd say, well, I think Jesus probably would have used Christmas trees today. He'd be like, you cut down these trees, you put them in your house, you decorate them, you put popcorn, you put the lights on, they're beautiful. I should have took a picture. We just got ours up this week, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, do you do this do you have like the nice tree or the family tree? Does anybody, do you do like the nice tree, or do you like a family, just let the kids do what they want to with it? We don't do that, right? My wife wants the nice tree. So we have the nice tree. Mother-in-law comes over, helps make the nice tree. The kids we spend the whole season going, don't touch it, don't touch it. You know what I'm saying? Okay. That's a side note. That's for free. You didn't need that. But think about what's actually being done here. You got these pretty things that we put up in our home. They look nice, but they're really dead. You understand? They're really dead. And that's what Jesus is saying. He's like, you're like a Christmas tree. You're decorated. People look at you and they go, this looks very nice, right? And he's like, but you're dead, right? And by January, for some of you, by February, you'll be on the curb, right? Waiting for sanitation to remove you, right? You are dead. It looks nice, but you're dead. The dog's drinking out of your bowl, you're dead. Are you with me? I think that's what Jesus would, if he, just for free. All right, so let's ask this question. One simple question for the whole morning. This is it. Are you ready? Simple question for the whole day. Is there something dead you're keeping alive? Think about that. Because that's really what Jesus is saying to this particular religious group. He's like, you look good on the outside, but I know what's going on the inside. You're holding on to a bunch of things that are dead. Listen to his words here one more time. Back to the text. You appear to people as righteous, but on the inside, you're full of hypocrisy and wickedness. The stuff that's going on in here is pretty dead. And as a reminder to last week, not that we need to review the whole thing, but Jesus spends pretty much the whole Sermon on the Mount pointing out this dichotomy. He's saying, yes, you don't publicly do this, but there's something going on inside that's really dead. And you keep telling yourself because the outside measures up that the inside doesn't matter, but that's not true. And we all do that to some extent. We put on there's an act of sinlessness, but we know that inside is sinful, even if it's just in the thoughts or in, the desires. There's something going on that's broken. And so when we ask that question, hey, is there something that you're keeping alive? We're really saying, is there things that you're holding on to internally, that are really off, that are really, and I know, are part of our brokenness? We do a fairly good job of trying to delineate some of the nuance here and not to repeat the minutia again, but I do want to say this. When it comes to the issue of sin, we think about it in these two kind of layers, the sin of condition and the sin of choices. For most of us, you grew up in a religious setting where this was not delineated, that there was no explanation of these two concepts, that it was just all sin, and sin is always a choice. And that's not actually accurate or completely true, and it's helpful to delineate these two issues. See, when we think of sin as condition, we're talking about, next slide, check this out. We're talking about things like the results of sin, meaning that you're born into a world that things are broken. You're broken without any choices that you ever make. Paul says that we're all sinful from the very beginning, that we're born into a nature that's broken because of the passing down of sin that has corrupted our environment. So there's a results of sin. And so you say, well, why are some people born with physical deformities or disabilities or all these things? That's the results of sin. That's the way the Bible explains it, that the results of sin in the world is that things are broken, not as they were completely meant to be. All of us are haunted by the concept of our coming mortality, but that's not what was meant to be. Those are the results of sin that are present in our broken environment. And so when it comes to the condition, you're talking about things like our physicality, our emotionality, our mental, all these brokenness things, our sexuality. And you go, man, these things feel completely out of our control. We've just been tossed in there, and there's brokenness there. And there's an element that's completely true. And Jesus comes as Savior to solve all of the brokenness, to redeem and reconcile everything, to make things right again between God and man, and that brokenness. And some of this brokenness is a nature that we didn't choose. We just ended up there. But putting that aside for a moment, there's a whole nother side to this coin where there's choices that get made. Yes, all of us have a broken nature, and yes, some of us have the results of sin in our lives and in our minds or in our bodies that we will never completely overcome this side of heaven. But there's a whole other side of the story here where some of this brokenness are things we are choosing, that we continue out of that broken nature to choose and hold on to and to cultivate and to continue to just kind of like collect into our thinking and into our life. So if you took hate or unforgiveness and adultery and porn and greed and theft and gluttony and addiction, I would call these the things of out of controlness. Meaning that, yes, there's a nature that we didn't choose, but we continue to make choices in this pattern and cultivate some of these things that we know do not feed our soul. We know are corrupting our soul, corrupting our existence. Think that through for a moment. We're holding on or cultivating behaviors every day that are corrupting the very way we were meant to live. In comes Jesus, who brings about this reconciliation, but some of us are still in this kind of in-between state where we want to receive that forgiveness. We want to hold on to that grace. We thank God for his amazing grace, yet feel this sense that our choices are outside of our control. Where our nature is and will ultimately be restored by God, our choices are in our control. What we choose to do and choose to hold on to, they're in our control. It's just that sometimes we get to a place where it feels like, I don't know why I'd try. I feel defeated. If you've ever been on a yo-yo diet, it feels like that, right? Like, I'm good for 3 weeks, and then it's Thanksgiving, and I'm going to eat like a crazy person, right? And then you're like, I'll get back to this in January. And then all of a sudden, you feel like, how would I ever, right? Well, how am I supposed to with all of this going on? I mean, have you seen the chocolate cake that my aunt brings to, whatever it is, right? And the whole time, what you're really saying is, I feel like I can't stop this. I feel like my choices aren't really my choices. And so in that process, there's this lie. Now, whether you're a super spiritual person and you believe that there's a, kind of a higher level powers beyond what we see and always know, or whether you're just like a really like, give me science and let me define this. I don't care. Like if you're sitting here and you're saying, yeah, I think sometimes the devil's working on me. Okay, I get what you're saying. And if you're here and you're like, oh, goodness gracious, is that where we're going? And you think, well, it's just me talking me out of things that I should do. Whatever you want to say to yourself at this moment is fine, because the end results here remain the same. If you tell yourself, or if you believe things about your current condition that aren't true, mostly, hey, I can't change, I'm out of control, there's no use trying, then what we ultimately get is a continuation of choice-based behaviors that are infecting and ruining our very soul and very existence. They'll bleed out into relationships. They'll bleed out into marriages. They'll bleed out into relationships with our kids and all of these things. If you continue to tell yourself, well, it's just the way I am. I hold a grudge. We like read, like we're really good at like redefining all the words, right? We don't just say I'm an unforgiving person, right? I tend to hold a grudge. Really, what you're saying is I'm a jerk, right? And I tend to love to accept the forgiveness of God and never forgive anybody else, right? It's like, well, if we just got simple with it, we'd probably figure that out. But we tell ourselves all of these things to continue choice-based behavior that we know corrupts our very existence. And at some level, we've got to be willing and big enough to say that out loud. We got to face that. We got to be empowered by God to see change in those areas. We can make excuses for everything. I don't care what's on the list. Greed. We can make excuses for that. Gluttony, make excuses for that. We can make excuses for lust and excuses for hate and racial bias, whatever it is. We'll figure out a way to say, yeah, it's all right. I mean, based upon my personal experience, this is where I've ended up. And what you really mean to say is a sinner, right? And I'm not going to address those sins, even though I know that by doing that, it would lead to a life that God intended for me, a better life that God intended for me, a better existence, a better soul, which ultimately ends up to better relationships. And so that's part of what's going on. Back to the question. Is there something dead you're trying to keep alive? I mean, Jesus is saying, look, you can fool a lot of people with your outward appearance. There's a lot of things that people don't pick up and don't see. But are you holding on to something inside that's really dead? And you're just keeping it alive. You're just keeping it alive over and over, whatever it is. And are you telling yourself, well, I got to keep it alive, or I'm going to keep it alive because it's just my lot in life. It's just how I am. It's just what I do. It's just me. It doesn't have to be. And that's really the message of the New Testament. Yes, there'll always be brokenness in our life. And yes, there'll always be a nature that we're battling against. And yes, we look forward in faith to God making all of that right in us by his grace. But we don't just put everything on hold and pretend nothing will be addressed that is corrupting our souls. And believers have to be able to grapple with that. Paul says it this way. In Ephesians chapter 5, he says this, and this is interesting. He says, don't get drunk with wine, but be filled with the Spirit. It's pretty good. Think about the words that he's saying here. The actual word is wasted in the original language, which everybody here understands. At least you know somebody, right? Even if it's not you. Or maybe you look back on a time, bad night or something, where you say, whew, we were wasted. Right? I mean, that's literally the illustration that Paul's using. He's using an illustration to a culture who drank wine at every meal, probably including breakfast, that was very familiar with the concept of drunkenness. And he's saying, look, you know how it is when you drink wine and you overindulge, you end up saying things like this. I don't know what I was thinking. Must have been the booze, right? It wasn't me. I was out of control. We were wasted. We were gone. That's literally what we say today, right? And I'm not knocking anybody, but that's what he's saying. He's saying, you know how it is when you drink wine and you drink too much and you say, I was out of control, right? It wasn't me. It was the wine. Are you with me? We say this, and that's part of our vernacular. Think about what Paul's saying. He's saying, I'd like you to flip that. What if you pursued God in his voice in a way that you drenched yourself with the Spirit? That you were filled up, not with wine, but with the Spirit. And think about what the illustration here is. The illustration is, as you get filled with the Spirit, ultimately you're going to say, you will not believe the things I'm doing. This is crazy. I am out of control, right? But it's a different out of control. He's saying, I would not normally forgive. And all of a sudden, I was like, I'm offering this guy forgiveness, right? This guy cut me off in traffic, and I was like, have a nice day. You know, I mean, I got cousin Bob who wants to come to the house for like Christmas, and normally I'd be like, forget it, you know, and all of a sudden I'm like, you know what? I might even get him a Christmas present this year. Like, whatever it is, like, there's this change that starts to happen, and the change that's happening in Paul's language is, as you spend more time in step, being filled with, in worship, the Spirit of God, it's like being drunk, he says. It's like you're going to start saying, I don't know where that came from. I don't know what I said. That was crazy talk. You know what I mean? You start to say, what I really am doing here is handing over control of my steps, my life, my words, my choices. I'm handing it over to God. And normally, I got to tell you, that's not my normal thing. Some things have started to happen in me that is not the norm. I get people all the time. We sit down and they go, I got to tell you, I've been coming to church for a little while, and normally I'd have this big blow up with whatever, my spouse or my kid or the work. And I got to tell you, I've been putting the worship music on before I go to work in the morning, and the words are coming different, and the thoughts aren't there as they used to be. I'm feeling a sense, it's like an out-of-body experience. Are you with me? This is the language that Paul chooses to use that I think is so, like, human. He takes human brokenness, like, hey, I've overindulged here, I'm completely out of control, and he goes, what if you did that with God? And what if you allowed God to kind of breathe life into the way you were meant to live? All of a sudden, it's not a show anymore. Look at me. Look at how spiritual I am. Look at my exterior. All of a sudden, you're inviting God to turn that light on inside. And as we do that, he fills up those dark places. And all of a sudden, there's changes that you never even thought of, that you didn't think were possible, that are just not you, that you will probably say to somebody else, I don't know what's going on, man. The more I spend time with God, the more things change for me. The things just start to roll off my back that I used to care so much about. I used to get so frustrated or angry or this or that, or I'm holding on. That just rolls with me now. And not everything's perfect. I'm not holding myself up as perfect. I get that. I still fall. I still have weird like patterns and weird desires sometimes. But I notice some things that are changing in me. And I feel empowered to make choices that feed my soul at this point. That's the language of the New Testament. I think that's what Jesus is addressing here with these religious leaders. He's like, you've missed this. You're really good at white-knuckling your exterior morality, and you're not good at being filled, controlled, led by the Spirit. Because really, it's you and not the Spirit's work that's in control. Are you with me? Let's take a moment this morning. So here's what my proposal is. I'm going to have Grayson back up. Let's give you like a little backdrop here, because if it gets too quiet, everybody gets creeped out. So we'll have a little backdrop here, and then I want you just to take a moment this morning. I mean, you're in a church. We're sitting here together. We're having a moment, right, where we're hearing from the Word, and I just want you to say to yourself, okay, let's just pray and say, hey, Father, God, would you just shed light in dark places in me? Whatever I'm holding on to that's dead, I'm holding on to things that are dead, that are broken. Expel those. Give me the strength. Fill me with the Spirit. Right? Just ask that. You're just asking that question. Fill me with the Spirit. If you're here and I'm seeking you, and you're there, fill me with your Spirit. May I walk in your ways. May I sense your leading. May I say to somebody else this week, I don't know where that came from. Right? You're just asking for that experience to be true that Paul's promising in your life. Let's just take a moment. Let's have that prayer. Let it be real for you. I'm just going to prompt you a little bit. Why don't you start with Bye. God bless. Love you, mean it.